Imagine a world where a single breath could carry a story stretching back thousands of years, a tale woven into the very air we share. Picture a disease so ancient it's left its mark on Egyptian mummies, so persistent it's outlasted empires, and so deceptive it once turned pale skin and frail bodies into symbols of beauty. This is a journey through time and across continents, a story of human struggle, ingenuity, and resilience, and it begins with a man named James Watt, a genius of the Industrial Revolution who couldn't save his own son. James Watt was a tinkerer, a man whose mind reshaped the world. He perfected the steam engine, sparking a revolution that lit cities at night and sent trains roaring across continents. But in the early 1800s, his son Gregory fell ill. A cough lingered, night sweats soaked his sheets, and his once vibrant frame began to waste away. Gregory was just 27, a gifted speaker with a face so striking a friend called him literally the most beautiful youth I ever saw. Watt threw himself into the problem like it was another machine to fix. He invented a device to pump nitrous oxide into Gregory's lungs, hoping a shift in the air might heal him. It didn't work. Gregory died in 1804, and Watt, for all his brilliance, was helpless against the invisible enemy consuming his son's body. A century later, in rural Tennessee, another father faced the same foe. Charles Goodrich was a country doctor, riding horseback through the night to deliver babies and tend to the sick. His son Stokes was born in 1900, a fragile child who barely survived typhoid fever as a baby and the influenza pandemic as a teenager. By his 20s, Stokes was coughing up blood. An X-ray revealed the truth: tiny seeds of destruction scattered across his lung, a condition so dire the technician whispered to Charles, "I've never seen a case that lived over 2 months." Stokes was sent to a sanatorium in Asheville, North Carolina, a place where fresh air was the only medicine they had. Despite the best care, he grew weaker, and on May 18, 1930, at just 29, he slipped away. Charles, like Watt, could do nothing but watch. What tied these two fathers together across time wasn't just grief. It was a disease that's been with us longer than we can fathom. It's been found in skeletons from 5,000 years ago, etched into the bones of ancient Egyptians like a grim signature. In China, they called it lung exhaustion or destroyed palace, words that painted a picture of a body crumbling from within. The Greeks named it phthisis, meaning decay, and warned doctors not to even try treating it, you'd only fail. It was consumption, a slow thief that stole breath and flesh, leaving its victims hollowed out. And it didn't care who you were. Kings like Henry VII of England, poets like John Keats, and even the richest man of the 19th century, J. Good, all fell to it. Charles Dickens once wrote it was a disease wealth never warded off, and he was right. But here's the twist that makes this story so wild. This wasn't just a plague of the past. Fast forward to a sweltering day in Sierra Leone, a small country in West Africa, where I walked into Laka Government Hospital. It's a place that feels stuck in time: crumbling buildings, no electricity, no running water, rooms that look more like prison cells than a hospital. There, I met a boy named Henry. He grabbed my shirt with a grin and tugged me around like a tour guide, showing me the lab where a technician peered at slides under a microscope, the wards where thin men lay on cots, barely moving. Henry looked about 9, all spindly legs and a rugby shirt that swallowed him up. He spoke English with a brightness that cut through the gloom, saying, "I am happy, sir. I am encouraged." I figured he was some staff member's kid, a little burst of life in a grim place. Then a nurse told me the truth. Henry was 17, a patient, his growth stunted by years of hunger and the same disease that took Gregory and Stokes. Henry's story hit me hard. He'd been sick since his early teens, coughing and fading while the world around him barely noticed. In Sierra Leone, getting a diagnosis can take months. Hospitals are scarce, equipment scarcer. By the time he landed at Lacca, his body was a battlefield. The antibiotics he got at first helped a little, enough to get him walking and smiling, but they weren't enough. The bacteria in his lungs were stubborn, resisting the drugs, and without something stronger, he'd be another name on a long list of losses. Over 1 million people die from this disease every year, more than malaria, typhoid, and war combined. And here's the kicker: we've had a cure since the 1950s. So why was Henry still fighting for his life? Let's rewind to 1882, when a German scientist named Robert Koch changed everything. For centuries, people guessed at what caused this sickness. Some said it was inherited. Hippocrates thought consumptives beget consumptives. Others blamed demons, bad air, or too much whiskey. In ancient India, they pointed to fatigue and hunger. But Koch locked himself in a lab, stained a slide with dye, and peered through a microscope. There it was, a tiny, rod-shaped bacterium, Mycobacterium tuberculosis. He proved it was the culprit, spreading through coughs and sneezes, a discovery so big it won him a Nobel Prize. Suddenly, the mystery had a face. Finding the bug was one thing, stopping it was another. Early fixes were brutal: bloodletting, rubbing buzzard fat on your chest, or shipping off to sanatoriums for fresh air. None of it worked reliably. Then, in 1943, a breakthrough: streptomycin, the first antibiotic that could kill the bacteria. By the 1950s, a cocktail of drugs turned a death sentence into a curable illness. It was a triumph of human grit and science. But triumphs don't always stick. In places like Sierra Leone, the cure exists, but it's out of reach. Henry's drugs weren't strong enough because the bacteria had evolved, shrugging off the standard treatments. Newer, better drugs were available, stuff like bedaquiline, but they cost a fortune, locked behind patents and prices set by big pharma. For Henry, it was like having a key to a door he couldn't open. Sierra Leone's story explains a lot of this. It's a country rich in diamonds and ores, wealth that once studded British crowns, but centuries of colonial rule left it gutted. Railroads didn't connect villages, they ran from mines to the coast, built to siphon resources out, not to build a nation up. By 1950, after 150 years under Britain, life expectancy there was barely 30, while in London it was 69. Then came a civil war in the 1990s, 50,000 dead, millions scarred. Henry's mom, Isatu, was 23 when it started, pregnant with him as rebels tore through Freetown. She hid with friends, barely eating, giving birth in a clinic that soon ran out of everything. Henry grew up in a cinder block house with a rusty roof, in a city where power flickers and clean water's a gamble. Poverty isn't just a backdrop here, it's the fuel that keeps this disease burning. Think about that for a second. This isn't some unstoppable force of nature. It's a choice we've made or haven't made. In the US, maybe 500 people die from this each year, a number kept low by good hospitals and insurance. In Sierra Leone, a kid like Henry is 100 times more likely to die. Why? Because the drugs are where the disease isn't, and the disease is where the drugs aren't. Back at Lacca, Henry's mom brought him extra food when she could, fighting the hunger that roared back as his treatment kicked in. Most patients there had no one, families abandoned them, ashamed of the stigma. But Isatu stayed, calling him her pastor for the way he lifted spirits, even as his own body betrayed him. Henry's fight got darker before it got better. His TB turned drug-resistant, a superbug that laughed at the old antibiotics. He'd lie in a room alone, the air heavy, his breath shallow, sores breaking open on his neck from swollen lymph nodes. His dad lost faith, threatening to pull him out of the hospital. But a doctor named Durham wouldn't give up. With help from a group called Partners in Health, they scraped together a custom mix of drugs, some driven from Liberia, others flown in from Lesotho. It was a Hail Mary, the first time anyone in Sierra Leone got this kind of tailored treatment. Henry didn't know if it'd work. He wrote poems in the dark, strange, and beautiful lines like "Golden axe, a mysterious battle / an axe which need to be found." He prayed, thought of a sadhu, and waited. Then, like magic, it started. Within a week, those sores on his neck began to dry up. Dr. Jerome couldn't believe it. He'd watch Henry eat again, gaining 10 pounds in a month. After 3 years in hospitals, losing friends, missing school, Henry went home at 18. He was alive, but scarred, lungs damaged, years lost. He and a sadhu moved into a tiny place, a leaky roof dripping on their mattresses. He wondered if he could ever catch up, if any school would take an 18-year-old freshman. But he did. With support, he excelled, landed at the University of Sierra Leone, studying management. He started making videos online, dancing with friends, sharing recipes with a sadhu, raising money for clean water. He became a voice, a TB survivor telling the world it's not a death sentence. Here's something wild. Henry's survival wasn't just luck, it was part of a bigger shift. Back in the 1990s, in Peru, a team took on drug-resistant TB when the world said it was too expensive. They tailored treatments, fed patients, sent health workers into slums. Cure rates hit 85%, stunning everyone. It proved the impossible was possible, and prices for those drugs dropped from $15,000 to $1,500 a course. Survivors like Fumeza Tisile, a South African who lost her hearing to toxic injections, picked up the fight. She sued a drug giant, broke their patent grip, and slashed the cost of bedaquiline by 60%. Today, curing resistant TB can cost as little as $300. Henry's life, Fumeza's voice, these are ripples turning into waves. But the fight's not over. This disease thrives where we let it, crowded slums, broken systems, places we've ignored. It's been with us forever, shaping history in ways you wouldn't believe. In the 1850s, a hat maker named John Stetson got sick, headed west for dry air, and invented the cowboy hat. New Mexico became a state because consumptives flocked there, chasing a cure. Even World War I has a thread. 3 tubercular teens botched an assassination, but one, Gavrilo Princip, got a lucky shot, sparking the war. It's wild to think a cough could shift the world like that. And it's not just history, it's now. Over 2 billion people carry this bacterium, a quarter of us. Most never get sick, but 10% do, especially where hunger or HIV weaken the body. In 2023, it killed 1.3 million people, yet a doctor told me 0 should die. We could make that true. Imagine a plan, search every household, treat every case, stop the spread. It'd cost $25 billion a year. Big, sure, but it'd save $40 for every dollar spent. We've got the tools, mobile X-rays, new vaccines in the works, apps tracking outbreaks. So why don't we? Maybe it's because we can't see it. I can't wrap my head around 1.3 million lives lost. Faceless numbers don't stick. But Henry does. He calls me Dad now, texts me one word at a time. Dad, hello, how's my namesake? He's 20, studying hard, grinning in a suit when he won Best TikToker at college. He gets malaria sometimes, his lungs still fragile, but he keeps going. He and a sadhu have a small home now, bought with help from strangers who heard his story. He wants art for the walls, dreams of a future where no one dies like his friend Thompson did. This isn't just about a disease, it's about us. It's been called the captain of all these men of death, but we're the ones steering the ship. We've beaten it before, turned it from a poet's curse to a curable bug. Now it's a mirror, showing us where we've failed, where poverty festers, where care doesn't reach. Henry's alive because people fought for him, because science met stubborn hope. We could do that for everyone. Picture a world where no father buries a son like Watt or Charles did, where no kid like Henry waits for a miracle. That's not a dream, it's a choice, and it's ours to make.